Stop acting obsolete, Maria. We are done babysitting that lathe. Trent Colby fired at a cross bay 3 at 5:42 a.m., loud enough that the tool crib clerk looked up from a barcode scanner, and the two night shift setters near the coolant reclaim tank went quiet. The words landed harder than the forklift backup alarms and the roof fans combined, because he did not say them in private. He said them to establish hierarchy in front of witnesses. Maria Hayes stood at the headstock of the old 24-inch engine lathe, one gloved hand resting on the carriage handwheel, and looked past him to the thing that mattered more than his tone. The clear polycarbonate chuck guard was not on its pivot arm. It was unbolted and leaning against a blue coolant drum like scrap. The mounting bracket sat open. The interlock cable hung loose. By habit, not nerves, she scanned left to right the way 17 years on manual and CNC turning had trained her to do. Spindle nose, jaw condition, key position, guard hinge, e-stop, foot zone, log sheet. The bay smelled like soluble oil and warm steel. Night shift had rough-turned 4140 bars and left gray spirals in the chip conveyor. On the whiteboard above the job packets, someone had written late order recovery week in red marker and circled it twice. Trent had drawn an arrow under it and added open access setup. Maria did not need to guess what that meant. She had seen this pattern in 3 shops in 2 states. Schedule pressure became language, language became policy, policy became a shortcut, and shortcuts on rotating equipment turned into incident reports. She crouched by the coolant drum, picked up the guard with both hands, and checked the interlock plunger where it should have mated with the guard tab. The tab had fresh wrench marks. Somebody had removed it cleanly on purpose, not during maintenance, not because of a crack. She set it down, straightened, and spoke in a normal voice. Who signed off on removing safeguarding? Trent walked toward her in a pressed black jacket that still had rain dots on the shoulders from the parking lot. He was management clean in a room built for grime. Polished boots, no chip burn on the cuffs, no coolant splash on the knees. I did, he said. Open access setup all week. We are 47 hours behind on Aerodyne. Every second counts. Then put it back. She kept her eyes on the spindle and not on him. No guard means no interlock path. No interlock path means spindle start can happen with key in jaw. He laughed once, short and public. Real operators don't need training wheels. The phrase spread through the bay the way bad news always did. Not through shouting, but through silence. The junior operator assigned to shadow her this week, Eli Navarro, paused with a collet wrench in his hand and looked from Trent to Maria. Eli was eager, smart, 6 months in, and still in that dangerous stage where he could execute instructions faster than he could challenge them. Maria had seen 20 versions of him across her career. Good workers who survived by reading the room until the room taught them the wrong lesson. She stepped to the setup station and pulled the pre-shift logbook toward her. Date, machine ID, shift initials, deviations. Trent's handwriting sat in the margin, thick block print in blue ink. Guard removed for cycle time efficiency. There was no engineering approval code next to it, no maintenance tag, no risk sign-off. Under the key hook, the retractable tether clip that normally retained the spring-loaded chuck key was also missing. The small steel ring was gone from its screw point. That second absence tightened her chest more than Trent's insult had. One barrier disabled, one backup missing. 2 holes in the same Swiss cheese slice, stacked by decision. She lifted the key from the tray, held it up between thumb and forefinger, and addressed Eli without raising her voice. "Look at this. Spring-loaded chuck key. If it stays in one jaw and the spindle turns, centripetal force throws it. On this machine, at 1,200 revolutions per minute, that key is a projectile." Eli swallowed and nodded. "I always pull it right away." "Good habit," she said. "Guard interlock exists for when habit fails under pressure." Trent moved closer, close enough that she could smell his coffee over the coolant mist. "Are you done with the lecture?" "We are not running a classroom." Maria set the key down flat on the cart. "This is not a lecture. It is startup safety." He pointed at the load board with the back end of a marker. "It is 5:46. First part should already be spinning. You've got one setup, one roughing pass, then handoff to CNC. Instead, you are stalling." She faced him now. "I am not stalling. I am refusing to energize this spindle without the guard installed." The sentence hit the floor like a dropped bolt. A refusal in open bay language was procedural, not theatrical. It triggered paperwork, radios, supervisors, and eventually lawyers if someone pushed past it. Trent knew that. His jaw shifted. "Refusing a direct order?" he said. "Refusing an unsafe condition." She tapped the logbook note with one finger. "You removed a safeguard. You documented it without approval." He smiled in the way managers smiled when they were trying to turn policy into personality. "You hide behind rules when pace gets real. That's why you top out on old equipment." Maria had heard worse in machine shops, but the word obsolete had a specific insult vector in a trade built on accumulated touch. Experience in turning was not resume decoration. It was pattern recognition measured in tenths and seconds. She could hear chatter onset before a dial indicator showed it. She could identify a dull insert by chip color. She could smell a coolant concentration drift. Half an hour before QA test strips confirmed it. That competence prevented scrap and injuries no one ever saw because prevention left no dramatic footage. Trent framed it as fear because fear was easier to mock than mechanics. She looked at the hazard. Then she looked at Trent. "My name is Maria Hayes. I am a turning specialist. 17 years manual and CNC, aerospace tolerance work, spindle safety certified, lockout certified. I make $98,000 a year because I catch failure before first cut. If you want to run this machine without guarding, put that in writing with your name and the time." Around them, the bay resumed movement in cautious fragments. A pallet jack rolled past slower than usual. Someone keyed a radio and then released, without speaking. Eli set his wrench down and stepped half a pace back from the lathe, waiting for the decision that would define what this shop rewarded: throughput theater or operational discipline. Trent's face hardened. "You're not special, Maria. You're replaceable. We have people who are hungry to work." "Then assign one," she said. "Not on my authorization." He leaned in until his voice dropped below the fan noise, a private threat wrapped inside public theater. "You keep this up, I'll mark attendance points, move you to cleanup, and we'll see how long your pay rate survives." Her pulse rose, but her hands stayed steady. She had a mortgage, a mother on medication, and no fantasy about how easily management could make a good operator's life expensive. Still, she knew the arithmetic on rotating mass better than she knew office politics. Spindle Energy did not care about title or payroll band. Steel obeyed force. Bodies paid for denial. At 5:52 a.m., she keyed her shoulder radio to channel 1 and spoke in formal incident cadence. Bay 3, machine L24, startup hold. Guard removed and interlock defeated. Operator refusal pending safeguard restoration. Timestamp 0552. Dispatch answered after 2 seconds. Copy. Bay 3 startup hold. Guard issue logged. That transmission mattered because memory bent under pressure, but records did not. Trent turned away as she spoke, then turned back with a flat stare that tried to empty the room of alternatives. You just made this bigger than it needed to be. It was already bigger, she said, nodding toward the unbolted shield. You made it bigger with a wrench. He barked a laugh and raised his voice again so the nearest stations could hear. Listen up. This is what lazy looks like. Hiding behind plastics and paperwork while the customer clock runs. No one answered him. Even the workers who liked him stayed quiet, because every person on that floor understood what a chuck key could do when it left steel at speed. Some had seen photos in annual training. Some had seen walls with patched dents and wondered what made them. Maria had attended a retraining after an incident at another plant 2 years earlier. The key had punched through thin sheet metal and shattered a man's orbital bone. He survived. He never ran machines again. That memory sat behind her ribs now, not as panic, but as calibration. She moved the guard from the drum to the workbench so it would not be stepped on or cracked, then placed the detached bolts beside it in a neat line. Physical evidence, intact and visible. She photographed the mount point, the hanging interlock cable, the missing key tether location, and Trent's handwritten log note. 4 images, time-stamped. She uploaded them to the internal safety folder from the terminal kiosk while Trent watched without speaking. The upload bar reached 100% at 5:57 a.m. When she logged out, he said, "You done performing?" She met his stare. "I am done documenting." He gestured toward Eli with an open palm, the move of a man replacing a part he considered defective. "Navarro, you wanted more machine time? Here it is. Step in." Eli froze for 1 beat, eyes flicking to Maria, then to the exposed spindle. "With the guard off?" "With me here," Trent said. "You'll be fine." Maria did not step between them. Procedure mattered most when power wanted spectacle. "Eli," she said clear and level, "you have the right to refuse unsafe startup." Trent snapped back. He has the obligation to do his job. The shift horn for 6 a.m. sounded, long and metallic, through the rafters. Bay 3 moved into day pace, radios crackling, forklifts cycling, orders advancing on paper. Maria stood beside a lathe that should have been ordinary and felt the hard edge of the day lock into place. The conflict was no longer theoretical, no longer a disagreement about management style. The guard sat off machine. The key tether was missing. The order pressure was posted in red. The insult had done its work. It had tried to turn expertise into embarrassment. She did not accept that trade. Physics would arbitrate the argument later, with no interest in anyone's pride. Maria did not wait for later. She stepped to the control pedestal, turned the mode selector to setup lock, and pressed the spindle inhibit so the green, ready light went dark. The lathe answered with a soft relay click, the kind of small sound that meant a human still had a chance to keep a bigger sound from happening. Eli stayed where Trent had pointed him, close to the cross slide, shoulders tight, palms open and uncertain at his sides. "Don't touch the start bar," Maria said, keeping her voice level and her eyes on the machine. Not for a jog, not for a bump, not for anything. Trent exhaled sharply behind her. You already made your speech. She ignored him and reached for the panel lamp. When it illuminated, it washed the spindle nose and three-jaw chuck in a flat white glare that erased shadows and exposed details people missed when they were in a hurry. On jaw 2, near the key socket, she saw a bright crescent scar in the steel where a key had ridden half-seated at some point in the past and slipped under torque. Old witness mark. Old warning. She pointed it out to Eli with one gloved finger. See that polished arc? That doesn't come from normal tightening. It comes from rushed engagement and slip. Eli leaned in, swallowed, and nodded. I never noticed it. Because this guard used to make you slow down and square up, she said. It forced one rhythm. No guard means people invent their own rhythm. The machine was a legacy American iron frame, retrofitted twice, once for variable frequency control and once for digital readout, which made it deceptively modern to anyone who looked only at the keypad. The mass bearings and spindle geometry were still old school, heavy, forgiving in cut, unforgiving at startup error. Maria crouched and traced the interlock cable route with her eyes. The micro-switch harness that should have terminated into the guard hinge bracket had been looped back and tied with a white zip tie near the conduit gland, effectively spoofing closed status if someone bridged the right pair. She did not touch it yet. She wanted Eli to see, not just hear. At a glance. This looks disconnected, she said. It's worse than disconnected. It's staged for bypass. Trent snapped. No one bypassed anything. It's temporary removal. Maria rose, turned, and held his stare for one measured second. Temporary removal without lockout is bypass by function. Words don't change current path. By 6:07 a.m., the rest of Bay 3 had reached full rhythm. A horizontal mill started up 2 aisles over. Coolant pumps thumped to life. And the overhead crane rolled a fixture plate toward Bay 5 with chains clinking in intervals. Inside that industrial noise, Maria built a narrow bubble of procedure around the lathe. She opened the electrical cabinet access door with her maintenance key, not to service but to inspect visible status. The safety relay module, a yellow block added during retrofit, showed channel A lit and channel B dark. A mismatch that should have thrown a fault but didn't because someone had moved the jumper plug from test to run override. She felt anger rise and then flatten into concentration. Eli, come here, she said. He stepped beside her. She pointed at the relay LEDs. 2-channel interlock means both channels must agree. If one says guard open, spindle start should be denied. Right now, one channel is blind. That is not a glitch. That is deliberate. He stared at the lights. Can that happen by vibration? Not on this module. You need a screwdriver. Trent gave a short, dismissive laugh. You're inventing sabotage now? She did not answer him. She took a photo of the relay face, then one of the jumper position, then one wide shot, including machine ID plate L24, date stamp visible on her screen. Evidence had to be boring and complete to survive review. Dramatic photos died in meetings. Clear photos closed cases. Next, she checked the chuck key itself. Standard spring-loaded type, T-handle, worn knurling where operators' palms had polished it smooth. The spring should have returned the pilot out of socket unless actively pressed in. She compressed it on the bench and watched the return. It came back sluggishly, then stuck at half travel before extending. She repeated twice. Same hang. Coolant residue and chip fines had migrated into the spring collar. "This is why tether exists as backup," she said to Eli, loud enough for Trent to hear without making him the audience. "Spring is a behavior aid, not a guarantee. If it sticks once under pressure, you have a flying steel bar." Eli shifted his weight. "Can we clean it and keep going?" "Not with interlock defeated and guard off," she said. "One correction doesn't erase stacked hazards." Trent stepped in, trying to reclaim center stage. "How long have you been planning this slowdown?" Maria placed the key on a lint-free rag, aligned it parallel to the bench edge, and wrote on the tag block, "Chuck key return failure, 611 MH." Then she bagged the missing tether screw hole photo with a second note. She was building a chain, because isolated flaws could be argued as oversight, but linked flaws told the real story. She moved to the spindle control panel and pressed diagnostic page 3. The fault history scrolled in reverse order. Start inhibit events, E-stop events, door/guard status changes. There were 17 guard status transitions logged in the prior 48 hours, all occurring during production windows, several within 30-second intervals. Repeated open-close simulation, likely from someone manipulating the switch state while leaving physical guard off. That pattern was its own confession. "Eli, look at these timestamps," she said. "Machine thinks the guard opened and closed in half-minute bursts while parts were running. Physical guard was on a drum. That means signal manipulation." Trent crossed his arms. "Or it means your retrofit software is noisy." "Noisy software doesn't remove bolts," Maria said. The young operator looked from the screen to the absent guard, then to the missing tether point. The cognitive shift happened on his face in real time, from wanting to please the boss to recognizing a system lying about its condition. He took one step away from the start controls without being told. Maria continued the inspection, because technical alarm was not one hazard. It was hazard interaction. She set a magnetic base on the carriage and positioned a dial indicator against jaw 1's outer face. Hand rotating the chuck slowly, she read total indicated runout at 0.0065 inches at jaw face without load. For rough stock that might pass? For safe startup with a worn key and no guard, that imbalance mattered because any eccentricity increased vibration onset. She reset its spindle nose register and read 0.0018, acceptable there, confirming most wobble came from jaw wear, not spindle bearings. Another note, another photo. "Run out high at jaw face," she said quietly to Eli. "Not shut down by itself. Combined with everything else, it increases chance of key chatter at bump start." Trent gestured at the whiteboard again. "We are turning short billets today, not balancing rockets. Start the machine." Maria looked at him with open disbelief, then returned to the panel and opened the spindle acceleration parameter page. Ramp was set to 0.8 seconds from stop to commanded low speed. She knew the normal setting on this machine. 2.5 seconds for setup mode, faster only during production cycle with enclosure secured. Someone had altered ramp to aggressive start, probably to shave seconds on every engagement. Fast ramp plus partially engaged key plus no barrier was not risky in an abstract way. It was a launch profile. She turned the screen toward Eli. "Read that number. 0.8. What should it be for setup?" He hesitated. 2.5. "Correct," Trent said. "I authorized faster ramp. We need throughput." "Then you authorized higher ejection energy at startup," Maria said. "At 1,200 revolutions per minute, Angular velocity is about 126 radians per second. Even a half-kilo key at a 12-inch radius carries enough kinetic energy to penetrate polymer and soft tissue once it departs tangentially. You don't get to negotiate with that. He rolled his eyes at the math, but Eli did not. Eli listened, and Maria could see him recalculating every rushed motion he had copied in his first 6 months on the floor. She remembered being 22, eager to prove she could keep pace with veterans, and she remembered which veteran had taught her to pause 1 second before every spindle start and physically say key out. That second had never appeared on any production dashboard. At 6:18 a.m., she keyed channel 1 again. Bay 3 update, L24 hazard assessment in progress. Additional findings: interlock channel mismatch, relay jumper override position, key spring return failure, missing key tether, acceleration parameter out of setup range, request maintenance, and EHS witness. Dispatch answered, clipped and careful. Copy Bay 3, maintenance notified. EHS notified. Trent's head turned fast. You called EHS without my approval? I called the procedure you signed during orientation, Maria said. He took 1 step toward her. You are not running this bay. Correct, she said. I'm preventing it from running unsafe. For a moment he looked ready to push further, but 2 operators from Bay 2 had drifted into line of sight, and the tool crib clerk remained at her station with a clear view and clear hearing. Hierarchy preferred closed rooms. Procedure preferred witnesses. Trent recalibrated, flattening his tone into managerial calm that fooled nobody who worked there. Fine, he said. Do your audit theater, then we run. Maria returned to the machine. She removed the chuck jaws one by one and checked seating surfaces for chip packing. Jaw 3 had a thin sliver of hardened chip trapped under the master jaw interface, enough to cant a workpiece under clamp load. She held it up with tweezers so Eli could see the tiny metallic crescent glint under the lamp. This is how false confidence starts, she said. Part feels tight. Indicator says close enough. Then at first acceleration it shifts a few thousandths, and your key engagement depth changes. Tiny cause, large consequence. Eli asked, Was this from night shift? Could be any shift, she said. Doesn't matter who. What matters is what condition exists now. She cleaned the interface, reseated the jaw, torqued to spec, then repeated on all 3 while narrating each step for Eli. Not because she wanted to teach in a crisis, but because skill transfer in real time reduced future risk better than speeches after injury. She then ran indicator again. Jaw face runout, dropped to point, 0038. Better, still not pristine, but no longer a multiplier on top of disabled safeguards. Maintenance had not yet arrived. EHS had not yet arrived. Maria checked the wall clock and felt the pressure line tighten through the room, the familiar line where schedules turned from concern into aggression. She also knew a second pressure line, invisible to most supervisors. Every minute an unsafe condition remained documented, but uncorrected increased legal exposure. Trent had already crossed from bad judgment into recorded intent. He just did not know the boundary language. She opened SOP 11.4 on the terminal and rotated the screen so Eli could read the exact text. Machine shall not be energized if primary guarding is removed or interlock circuit compromised, except under locked maintenance control with authorized work permit. She scrolled to the signature footer showing annual acknowledgement, then tapped Trent's electronic initials from February. You signed this, she said without heat. He stared at the screen, then away. Policies are written for ideal conditions. Incidents are written in real conditions, Maria said. The overhead lights buzzed. Coolant mist drifted in a faint blue haze. Somewhere in bay, a drill press bit squealed, and then went silent. Inside Maria's narrow field of attention, every indicator aligned toward the same conclusion. Not one dramatic defect, a mesh of smaller ones, removed guard, compromised interlock logic, missing tether, sticky key spring, aggressive start ramp, evidence of signal spoofing, jaw contamination, each alone arguable, together non-negotiable. By 6:26 a.m., Eli made his own decision. He pulled his gloves off, set them on the bench, and stepped fully clear of the controls. "I'm not starting it like this," he said, voice thin but steady. Trent snapped. "You taking lessons now?" Eli kept his eyes on the lathe, not on Trent. "I'm following the SOP on the screen." Maria felt a brief, stern relief. Not victory, just one more person choosing mechanics over pressure. She printed the diagnostic logs, clipped them to the hazard report form, and signed her name at the bottom where it said, "Reporting Operator." Then she wrote a second line in block letters. "Machine held for safeguard restoration and function test." She left a space for witness signatures, because this had moved beyond argument into record. From the main aisle came the approaching rattle of a maintenance cart and the brighter tone of EHS radio traffic, converging on Bay 3 as the lathe sat silent, unguarded and fully exposed for what it had become. Not an old machine, not a slow machine, but a case study waiting for someone to decide whether production targets outranked the laws of rotating steel. The maintenance lead, Gus Renner, rolled in first with a meter bag and lockout hasps clipped to his belt. An EHS specialist, Dana Pike, followed 2 steps behind with a tablet already open to incident intake. Trent shifted his posture the second they entered, shoulders square, chin lifted, performing control for a room that had just watched him lose it. Maria did not move from the control pedestal. She kept one hand on the printed logs and the other near the spindle inhibit, not because she expected someone to lunge for the start bar, but because a procedure was only real if someone held it in place when authority pushed back. Gus took one look at the detached guard on the bench and blew air through his teeth. "Who pulled it?" "I authorized temporary removal," Trent said immediately. "Set up efficiency for recovery week." Dana glanced at the open hazard form clipped under Maria's signature. "Was there an approved engineering deviation?" "No," Maria answered before Trent could recast it. "No approval code, no permit, no lockout maintenance control. Interlock path compromised. Key tether missing. Key spring sticking. Ramp parameter changed to 0.8 in setup." Trent held up a palm at Dana as if stopping traffic. "What we have is a veteran operator refusing to run and influencing junior staff. We need to get production moving while we sort paperwork." Maria met Dana's eyes, then Gus's. "You can sort intent later. Right now the mechanism is straightforward. If the key remains engaged and spindle starts, tangential ejection occurs at chuck radius. There is no barrier in place to stop trajectory." Gus nodded once, grim. "Let's verify interlock channel and jumper position." He leaned into the open cabinet while Dana began photographing machine ID, guard location, and the missing tether point. Trent paced one tight arc behind them, marker still in his hand, tapping it against his thigh in quick plastic clicks. The clicks formed their own countdown rhythm in Maria's ear. She noticed Eli edging farther from the machine, stationing himself near the tool cart, with his hands clasped to hide their shaking. She noticed 2 operators from Bay, 2 still pretending to adjust a vise while they watched. She noticed the overhead clock advancing towards 6:31 a.m., the minute when upper management typically started walking the floor. Gus called out from inside the cabinet. "Channel mismatch confirmed. Jumper plug is in override run position. Who touched this last?" Trent answered. "We had nuisance faults this week. I told night shift to keep it practical." Dana looked up from her tablet. "Who specifically?" "No idea. We run 3 crews." Maria slid the printed fault history toward Dana. 17 guard status transitions over 48 hours, several 30-second intervals while production was active. Physical guard was off machine, at least part of that window. That pattern is not random. Dana read, then added a note. "Understood." Trent snapped. "Can we stop building a criminal case and start building parts?" Maria stepped forward half a pace, enough to pull focus back to the machine. "This is not abstract compliance, it is energy transfer. At 1,200 revolutions per minute, the spindle completes 20 revolutions per second. If the key is half-seated and spring return hangs, the jaw strikes the key handle, converts retained potential into projectile motion, and sends it on tangent path at chest height for anyone standing here." She tapped the floor tile where Trent had been standing minutes earlier. Then she tapped a second tile where Eli had stood. "Primary strike lane. Secondary ricochet lane off divider or column. You can call that paperwork if you want. Steele calls it geometry." The bay was loud, but her explanation carried because she spoke in machine language, and machine language cut through politics. Gus emerged from the cabinet and held up the jumper plug between 2 fingers. "Removed. Interlock cannot be trusted until we function test full circuit with guard reinstalled." Trent pointed at the lathe. "Then reinstall it now and let's run." Maria answered first. "Not with this key." She unbagged the chuck key, compressed the spring collar, and showed the sticky half-return. Return failure is intermittent. Intermittent means it passes twice and fails on the 3rd try when someone is rushed. Gus took it, tested it himself, watched it snag, and swore softly under his breath without profanity. "She's right. This goes out of service." Dana entered another line item. "I'm issuing a temporary hold on L24 pending safeguard restoration, key replacement, and verification sign-off." Trent turned sharply toward Maria. "You happy now? You got your hold." Maria did not answer the bait. "I want a safe spindle and documented release criteria." The phrase seemed to irritate him more than any argument. He stepped close enough that Dana shifted her stance to keep him in peripheral view. "You want criteria? Here's mine. You're behind target by 47 hours. Every department is flexing except yours. You're turning this into a personal crusade." "It became personal when you called her obsolete in front of the bay," Eli said, surprising himself as much as everyone else. His voice cracked on obsolete but did not break. Trent rounded on him. "No one asked you." Maria cut in, controlled and flat. "Don't aim this at him. You gave the order. I refused the order. Keep it there." For 3 long seconds, Trent said nothing. The roof fans droned. A forklift horn chirped in the aisle. Coolant droplets ticked from the detached guard into a shallow pan like a metronome. Then Trent changed tactics from volume to procedure theater. "Fine, you refused. State it again for record with witnesses." Maria gave him exactly what he asked for. "At 6:34 a.m., I refused to energize machine L24 under unsafe conditions. Primary guard removed. Interlock integrity compromised. Key retention backup missing. Key spring return defective. Setup ramp parameter outside approved range. Mechanism of injury. Chuck key ejection due to rotational acceleration and loss of retention. Potential result, penetrating impact to personnel in operating envelope. Dana held her tablet up. Recorded, Gus added, and validated by maintenance inspection. Trent's jaw flexed. He had expected fear, maybe apology, maybe a private retreat he could recast as misunderstanding. Instead, he got witnesses and language that would survive audit. Maria felt her pulse in her neck, heavy and fast. But she also felt the steadiness that came when the facts were locked down and spoken aloud. She had not raised her voice once. She had not insulted him once. She had only described what a spinning chuck did to a forgotten piece of steel. By 6:39 a.m., the first wave of day shift supervisors started passing the bay with clipboards, and Trent pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, stepped 2 meters away, and made a call in a tone pitched low but urgent. Maria caught fragments. Refusal, disruption, immediate staffing adjustment. He ended the call, walked back, and switched to formal cadence, the cadence managers used when they wanted later deniability. Maria Hayes. Effective now. You are relieved from active operation pending review for insubordination and refusal of assigned task. Eli stared at him. Gus looked down at his meter bag. Dana's expression did not change, but she began another note. Maria asked one question. Is that a suspension? It is reassignment off spindle operations until HR clears you, Trent said. You can inventory inserts and crib overflow. If you decline, I mark attendance points. The pressure tactic was textbook. Isolate the dissenter. Recode safety refusal as behavior. Force a decision in front of peers. Maria understood the architecture because she had seen it used on others who lacked paperwork and witnesses. This time, the paperwork existed. Witnesses existed. She did not refuse reassignment, she refused the framing. I'll accept temporary reassignment, she said, and I can test the cause code. Put refusal for safety in writing, not insubordination. Trent gave a tight smile. You don't get to dictate codes, Dana finally intervened. For clarity, company policy requires preliminary classification as safety hold pending investigation when EHS is actively documenting a guard bypass. Trent shot back. EHS advises. Operations decides. Gus closed the cabinet door, applied a red lockout hasp, and snapped his lock through it with a hard metallic click. Maintenance decides whether this lathe can spin. It cannot. That click changed the room. No one argued with a locked cabinet in plain view. Trent pivoted to the only lever left. Replacement labor. He pointed at Eli. You, Bay 5 has a manual lathe open. Go there and run under supervisor direction. Eli hesitated. I'm assigned here this week. You're reassigned now, Trent said. Move. Maria stepped toward Eli, stopping at arm's length so no one could call it interference. Wherever they put you, do your own pre-start and verify guard function yourself. Trent barked. Stop coaching during disciplinary action. She's coaching safe practice, Gus muttered, not quite quietly. Trent ignored him. He pulled a folded form from his clipboard and wrote rapidly, pressing so hard the pen cut through to the page beneath. He tore off the top copy and held it out to Maria. Sign acknowledgement. She read before touching the pen. Employee removed from station for refusal to execute production directive. She looked up. This statement is inaccurate. Sign acknowledgement, not agreement. She signed, then wrote beneath her name. Signature acknowledges receipt only. Active safety complaint logged 552 and 618. EHS, witness present. She handed it back. Trent glanced at the added line and exhaled through his nose. You are determined to make this adversarial? It was adversarial when safeguard removal became policy, she said. At 6:47 a.m., a message alert pinged on Dana's tablet. She scanned it and looked from Maria to Trent. Corporate Risk requested immediate upload of today's photos and logs. Their automated audit flagged a safeguarding discrepancy tied to this machine ID. Trent's head turned. Audit from where? Insurer portal integration, Dana said. Routine sync. For a fraction of a second, Maria saw uncertainty cross his face, quick and raw, then disappear behind annoyance. Delayed consequences had entered the room without sirens, without sparks, without any dramatic crash. A digital flag in a remote server had just turned Bay 3 into a liability event. Trent recovered fast. Upload whatever you need. We're still making shipment. Dana replied, Maybe. But if this remains coded as intentional bypass, claim exposure changes. He waved it off, but the gesture lacked confidence. Maria recognized the shift. He was still pressing, still threatening, but now he was calculating outside witnesses he could not shout down. Gus finished tagging the lockout and handed Maria a duplicate key tag for her report packet. For chain of custody, he said. She tucked it into the clear sleeve with her photos, fault printouts, and hazard form. Physical evidence accounted for. External contact logged. Witnesses named. Trent stepped back into command voice one last time. Hayes, go to crib overflow now, Navarro Bay 5. Dana, send your report. Gus, fix your machine by lunch. Gus corrected him without looking up. Not your machine, company machine. Maria removed her gloves, folded them once, and set them on the bench beside the detached guard. She took one final look at the spindle nose, the empty hinge bracket, and the red lock hanging on the cabinet. The lathe was quiet, but the conflict was not. It had simply changed channels, from shouting on the floor to documentation in systems that remembered longer than people did. She turned toward the aisle to comply with reassignment, hearing Trent already on another call behind her, asking for someone hungry to cover Bay 3 as if hunger could substitute for safeguards. Maria walked to crib overflow with her report sleeve tucked under her arm and the smell of hot coolant still in her clothes, each step carrying the same tension. She had won the procedural argument for the moment, and she had lost control of what happened next. That was the crux she knew too well from years on industrial floors. A safe hold only stayed safe while somebody with authority respected it. Crib overflow sat behind a waist-high cage near Bay 1, stacked with insert trays, boring bars, and consumables that never made the glossy plant tour photos. The clerk, Janice, slid a clipboard across the counter without asking questions. Janice had heard enough from Bay radios to know this was not a normal reassignment. Maria signed in, scanned lot labels, and started counting CNMG inserts by grade and coding, reading numbers while her ears stayed tuned to Channel 1. Bay 3 kept bleeding into the background anyway. The broad fan hum, the occasional clank from the chuck area, voices clipping in and out each time the overhead crane passed. At 7:03 a.m., Gus's voice came over the radio. Maintenance to ops L24 remains locked out, pending replacement key and full interlock function test. Do not energize. The message was crisp, formal, and unambiguous. Maria marked another box on the clipboard and exhaled through her nose. 7 minutes later, Trent answered on the same channel, equally formal, equally performative. Copy. Prioritize return to service by lunch. Shipment risk is red. He never said yes to the lockout status itself. He acknowledged priority. Maria finished one drawer, moved to the next, and forced her hands to keep a steady pace. She could not stand in Bay 3 and she could not physically guard the spindle, so she did what experienced operators did when boxed out. She watched systems and people, not just machines. Eli crossed her line of sight at 7:21, heading toward Bay 5 with a face that looked 10 years older than it had at dawn. He saw her, slowed, and stopped by the cage. "They put me on the manual in 5, he said quietly. "Do your own check," she said. "Guard key, E-stop, then start." He nodded. "I heard him on the phone. He's still trying to run 3. He'll keep trying until something external stops him." She tapped the clear sleeve under her elbow. "Paper stops him slower than steel does. Keep your distance from both." By 8:40 a.m., the floor had shifted into a strained normal. Forklifts ran. QA carts moved. The late order whiteboard gained 3 more red circles. Maria was halfway through a mixed lot carbide count when Dana appeared at the cage with her tablet and a sealed evidence bag. "Chain copy for you," Dana said, handing over a printed acknowledgement of Maria's photos and logs. "Corporate risk reviewed initial upload." Maria read the line that mattered. "Provisional high-risk status pending, corrective action verification." That was fast. "Automated trigger," Dana said. "Any guard bypass tied to active production machine kicks it up immediately now. Insurer issued reservation language if there's an injury connected to intentional safeguard defeat." Maria looked toward Bay 3. Did Trent receive it? He did. He disagreed with the wording. Dana's expression stayed neutral, but fatigue showed around her eyes. "I'm documenting that too." At 9:12 a.m., Channel 1 cracked again. This time it was Trent, not bothering with formal cadence. "Gus, where are we on 3? Gus answered from somewhere near utilities. "Compressor fault in Bay 6. I'm tied up. L24 still down." Trent came back sharp. "I need it by noon." "Not without the new key and interlock verification," Gus said. "You already have the hold." The exchange ended there, but Maria felt dread settle deeper, not lighter. Repeated pressure, after repeated denials, was its own failure mode. It meant he was no longer arguing about risk truthfully. He was searching for the weakest person in the chain. At 10:05 a.m., she carried a bin of measured inserts to Bay 2 receiving and took the long route back on purpose so she could pass Bay 3. The detached guard was still on the bench. The red lock still hung on the cabinet. Trent stood at the whiteboard with 2 supervisors, stabbing the marker at shipment columns and speaking in clipped bursts. "No excuses. Recover in second shift. I need steel turning." When he noticed Maria in the aisle, he stopped mid-sentence and watched her until she moved on. A single line of time moved through her mind like a metronome. By late morning, pressure had stopped pretending to be temporary and hardened into policy. At 11:38 a.m., the floor lights flickered once during a utility transfer and came back steady. Maria heard an unfamiliar metallic snap echo from Bay 3, like side cutters biting hardened wire. She set down a tray and listened. No alarm followed. No maintenance call followed. She walked to the cage opening and looked down the aisle. Trent was at L24 with another supervisor, and a pair of bolt cutters leaned against the cabinet base where there had been none an hour earlier. The red lock was gone. She stepped out of the cage and crossed halfway before Dana intercepted her near Bay 2's fixture rack. "Don't engage him alone," Dana said under her breath. "I already called it in." "He cut a maintenance lock." "I saw. Security is notified." Maria's jaw tightened. "That is a willful violation." Dana nodded once. "I wrote exactly that." At 12:04 p.m., security did not appear in Bay 3. Lunch rotations and dock traffic had thinned staffing, and routine swallowed urgency the way big plants often did. Trent moved openly now, directing a setup tech to rehang the guard just long enough to photograph it closed, then ordering it swung back out for access. Maria watched from the aisle while anger and helplessness competed in her chest. He was not hiding the behavior, he was normalizing it. At 12:47 p.m., Eli returned from Bay 5 carrying a tool roll. Trent waved him over before he even reached the water station. Maria could not hear the first sentences, but she saw the pattern immediately. Finger point to Bay 3, hand chop toward spindle, eyes locked to enforce compliance. Eli's shoulders rounded inward. Maria closed the distance until she stood within hearing range, 10 feet from the lathe, the same 10 feet that later sat in every report. "He's assigned to elsewhere," she said. Trent did not look at her. "He's assigned where I put him." Eli spoke to Maria without taking his eyes off Trent. He said just a quick setup to catch one lot. "Quick setup is where key strikes happen," Maria said. "You know that now." Trent snapped. "Stop coaching. This is direct order execution." She pivoted to Eli. "Check the key return in your hand before anything spins." Eli did. He pressed the spring collar. It returned, then hesitated a fraction near the top. His face changed. He had felt the stick. "It's still hanging," he said. Trent answered immediately, already prepared. "Then keep your thumb on it. You're not at full RPM for indicator bump." Maria stared at him. "That is not a control measure. It is for one part." He loaded urgency into every movement after that. Billet from the rack. Jaw wipe. Tighten, loosen, tighten. Indicator mag base clamped to compound. He pushed Eli into a rhythm faster than thought, narrating each step like speed itself was competence. Maria stood outside the immediate envelope, hands open at her sides, speaking only when mechanism crossed into clear danger. "Seat the key fully, remove it fully, don't half-engage." Eli nodded each time, trying to satisfy two incompatible authorities at once. At 1:56 p.m., a radio call from dispatch announced freight arrival for Aerodyne pickup at 3:30. Trent smiled without humor and tapped the whiteboard. "There, clock is real now." Maria looked from the board to the exposed chuck and felt the dread sharpen to certainty. This machine had become an equation with almost every protective term stripped away. Disabled discipline, compromised guard practice, defective key behavior, accelerated startup, and a manager standing in the strike lane insisting on speed. At 2:11 p.m., Eli clamped a short steel billet, set the indicator tip to skim, and inserted the chuck key for a final tweak. The key sat in jaw 2. T-handle angled upward. He nudged the workpiece, watched needle movement, and reached for the key, but Trent's hand touched his wrist and stopped him. "Just bump it," Trent said. "Needle will settle." Maria's voice cut across the machine noise. "Key out, now." Neither moved. She stepped one pace closer, still outside the control arc. "Eli, key out before spindle start." Trent leaned shoulder close to Eli, eyes on the start bar. "You heard me. Just a bump." The green ready light came on at 2:13 p.m. Eli's thumb hovered over the spring collar. The key looked seated, but Maria could see it was shallow by a few millimeters, enough for the jaw face to kiss the handle under acceleration. She heard herself speak once more, louder than she had all day. "Stop. Remove the key." Eli flinched between voices and pressed the spindle start. The motor engaged with a hard electric hum, lower than a full run but faster than any safe setup bump should have been. 1 second later, the chuck made its first quarter turn. 2 seconds later, the key handle clipped jaw 1 and bounced, still trapped in the socket by partial engagement and sticky return. 3 seconds later, it whipped horizontal, blurring into a gray arc. 4 seconds later, the second strike came harder, metal on metal, a crack that snapped across Bay 3 and froze half the aisle. 5 seconds later, the key cleared the jaw entirely. It left on tangent path at chest height, a steel line too fast for eyes to track cleanly. Maria saw only fragments: a flash near the lamp, a streak through coolant mist, then impact into the plexi divider with a sound like a hammer through brittle ice. The divider fractured and gave way, redirecting the key into Trent's left shoulder and upper chest. He folded backward against the tool cart and hit the floor beside the chip pan, marker flying from his hand. The key did not stop there. It ricocheted off the cart frame and clipped Eli's forearm as he threw his arm up instinctively, tearing sleeve and skin in a narrow line before dropping into the coolant tray with a ringing splash. Then the room changed pitch. Eli screamed once, short and shocked. Someone in Bay 2 shouted, "Hit E-stop!" Maria was already there. She slammed the mushroom button and felt the click bottom out. The spindle coasted down with a rising whine, then a rough docile chatter. Coolant dripped from the broken divider edge. The smell of hot motor windings mixed with iron and the sharp chemical tang of fresh-cut plexi. "Trauma kit, Bay 3, now!" Maria yelled into Channel 1, voice clipped and procedural. "Projectile strike. 2 injured, conscious, immediate medical." Dispatch came back instantly. "Copy, Bay 3, trauma response en route, EMS notified." She moved first to Eli because he was standing and panicking, pressing his other hand over the forearm cut while backing away from the machine. "Sit down," she ordered, guiding him onto an overturned crate. "Pressure here. Keep your arm above your heart. Look at me." He looked at her, breathing hard, face color draining. "Stay with me. You're okay. Keep pressure." Janice arrived with the trauma kit and nitrile gloves. Maria tore open gauze packs, handed them off, then turned to Trent. He was conscious, gasping, one hand clamped over his left shoulder and chest where his jacket was darkening. No graphic scene, just the unmistakable signs of blunt, penetrating trauma and shock. Shallow breaths, unfocused eyes, skin turning gray at the lips. "Don't move," Maria said, kneeling beside him. "Help is coming." He stared at her, not fully processing. "I said just a bump," he whispered, as if repetition could reverse force. She placed gloved hands to stabilize pressure with clean pads from the kit, keeping his torso still. "Save your breath. Keep breathing slow." Around them, the bay had gone nearly silent except for radios, and the last faint spin down of nearby machines operators had shut off in reflex. 45 seconds later, Dana was at her shoulder with additional supplies and a phone on speaker to EMS. "Projectile path?" Dana asked. "Start bar to ejection in 5 seconds, impact at 8, Maria said without looking up. "Primary strike through divider, secondary ricochet to forearm." Gus arrived right after, took one look at the broken plexi and the key in the coolant tray, and swore softly again. "Nobody touches anything," he said to the gathering workers. "This is a scene." Maria nodded once. Even in emergency, evidence discipline mattered. She pointed with her chin. "Key is in tray. Divider fracture line visible. Cabinet lock was cut before operation." Dana replied, "Documented." 2 minutes later, plant medics reached Bay 3 with a stretcher, followed by municipal EMS rolling through the dock doors. Maria gave handoff in mechanical sequence. Time, mechanism, impact points, interventions applied, response status. The medic repeated it back and took over compression and monitoring. Eli went next, alert but shaking, arm bandaged and elevated. Trent was loaded last. Oxygen mask in place. Eyes open but distant. As they wheeled both men out, Maria finally stood, knees stiff. Gloves tacky with coolant and first aid residue. She looked at the lathe, at the detached guard still swung away, at the spiderweb divider, and at the whiteboard where late order recovery week remained circled in red above a line of untouched part counts. Physics had answered the argument in under 10 seconds, and Bay 3 was left with the sound nobody ever planned for. Not cutting, not grinding, not forklifts, just the thin electronic chirp of a tripped alarm, waiting for someone to acknowledge what had already happened. Maria moved to the alarm panel and silenced the chirp, not to erase it, but to make room for commands people could understand. The instant the sound cut out, Dana's voice took the bay. "Stop all spindle operations in bays 2 through 5. Lock controls and step clear." Gus echoed her on channel 1, and machines that had nothing to do with L24 wound down anyway, each motor tapering off into an uneasy quiet. Maria stood between the broken divider and the coolant tray, breathing through the metallic smell and trying to keep her hands from shaking now that both injured men were out of her reach. Security arrived 3 minutes late and looked overwhelmed until Dana pointed them into a task sequence. Perimeter first. Tape from that column to the tool crib aisle. Nobody crosses without my approval. Camera footage from 1355 onward preserve and duplicate. One guard nodded and started pulling red and white tape. The second guard photographed the cut lock hanging open on the cabinet latch, then the bolt cutters leaning against the base. Maria watched the lens angle and felt a cold kind of relief when she saw him include the serial tag on the hasp. Details survived arguments. Gus crouched by the coolant tray with a stainless retrieval magnet and looked up at Maria. "Witness while I collect?" She nodded. He lowered the magnet, lifted the chuck key free of oily coolant, and placed it into a rigid evidence tube Dana held open with gloved hands. Dana read out loud as she wrote, "Item 1. Spring-loaded chuck key recovered from coolant tray. Bay 3, Machine L24, 1419. She sealed it and made Maria initial the tape seam. Gus collected the cut lock next, then the severed shackle fragment from the floor seam near the cabinet hinge. Every object had a bag, a line number, a signature. By 2:30 p.m., the plant manager, Ron Velasquez, entered Bay 3 with QA lead Priya Menon and HR investigator Lisa Crow. Ron stopped at the tape and took in the scene without speaking. Detached guard swung out, fractured plexi, red lock cut, whiteboard still screaming, late order recovery week in red circles. He turned to Dana first. "Status of injured?" "Both transported. Eli Navarro stable with forearm laceration. Trent Colby conscious on departure with penetrating shoulder and upper chest trauma, active bleeding controlled by EMS." Ron's jaw tightened. "Scene integrity?" Contained, evidence logged, witness statements in progress, security footage preserved. He looked at Maria then, eyes direct but careful. You were primary operator assigned? I was reassigned after refusal, she said. I remained in visual range when the startup happened. Then you give first statement now. He motioned toward an empty inspection table just outside the tape. No interruptions. Lisa opened a recorder and put a time card on the table. Maria sat, still in stained gloves because she had not yet allowed herself the softness of washing her hands. Lisa began with formal prompts. Name, role, certifications, shift start, first observed hazard. Maria answered in sequence, the same sequence she had used all day, because consistency mattered as much as truth. When managers and insurers started searching for contradictions. She described the missing guard at 5:42 a.m., the logbook note in Trent's handwriting, the absent tether clip, the channel mismatch, jumper override, sticky key spring, setup ramp at 0.8 seconds, maintenance lockout, cut lock, and final command she heard at 2:13 p.m. Lisa asked, "Did you provide a direct warning immediately prior to startup?" "Yes," Maria said. "I gave 3 direct warnings. Key out now. Eli, key out before spindle start. Stop, remove the key." Ron asked the next question himself. Did Mr. Colby physically intervene with Mr. Navarro's hand? Maria paused long enough to be precise. I saw Trent touch Eli's wrist as Eli reached toward key removal, and I heard Trent say, "Just bump it." Priya was already writing, but she looked up when Maria finished. Any contamination risk to in-process product from this event? Potentially, Maria said. Projectile went through divider. Fractured plexi and coolant spray entered the immediate envelope. Every part in Bay 3 from last accepted check to incident time should be quarantined for foreign material review. Priya nodded once, sharp. Understood. As Maria signed her statement, Ron's phone rang. He stepped away 2 paces, listened, and his face changed in stages from annoyance to calculation to disbelief. He ended the call and came back to the table. That was Aerodyne Procurement. Their receiving dock already got word from dispatch that shipment missed the truck. He looked at Priya. They're invoking lateness clause, starting tomorrow, plus mandatory third-party safety monitor before accepting any turned hardware from this site. Priya asked, "How long a hold?" "Indefinite until corrective action package and independent verification." Dana added quietly, "Insurer had already placed provisional high-risk status this morning on guard discrepancy." Ron looked at her. "I need that in writing in 10 minutes. "It's already in writing," Dana said. "I'll forward." At 3:05 p.m., dispatch updated Channel 1 from the hospital. Eli had been treated and released to occupational medicine follow-up. Trent was in emergency surgery. Maria heard the words while standing at the sink, finally stripping off her gloves, and the water running over her hands looked clear, then cloudy, then clear again, as coolant, residue, and dust went down the drain. She did not feel vindicated. She felt exactly what she had predicted and tried to prevent, which was worse than being surprised. Ron called an emergency floor meeting at 3:20 in the calibration room because it was the only space large enough with a door. Supervisors, maintenance, EHS, QA, finance, and 2 union stewards crowded around a scarred conference table. Maria stood along the wall near the torque wrench cabinet, officially a witness, unofficially the person who had mapped the whole failure chain before lunch. Finance controller Mark Ellison projected a live cost sheet onto the wall monitor. Preliminary direct cost as of this hour, he said, voice tight. Emergency medical reserve set at $180,000 pending surgical coding. Immediate remediation and forensic support estimated at $210,000. Production halt on Bay 3 and connected turning cells? One shift. Roughly $96,000 in absorbed overhead and missed contribution. He clicked to the next line. Contractual exposure with Aerodyne, if hold extends beyond 48 hours, $142,000 per day under clause 7.3. Ron asked, maintenance estimate on restart? Gus did not hedge. This is no same-week restart. We've got scene hold, equipment forensic teardown, guard and interlock recertification, lockout audit, and external monitor requirement if customer insists. Best case, 19 days before unrestricted turning resumes in Bay 3 and linked manual cells. Mark typed the number and the room went quieter. 19 days at current clause? Math puts penalty exposure at roughly $2.7 million before legal and insurance offsets. One supervisor muttered, for one setup shortcut, and no one contradicted him. Lisa from HR spoke next, formal and clipped. Employment action effective immediately. Trent Colby is removed from operational authority pending investigation for willful safety violations, retaliatory conduct, and lockout tampering. Access badge suspended. She turned to Maria. Your reassignment record and insubordination code are frozen pending review. Do not discuss details on floor beyond required statements. Maria held her gaze. My refusal was on recorded safety grounds. Lisa nodded. That is in the file? At 4:02 p.m., legal counsel joined by speakerphone and asked for a strict chronology. Dana delivered it minute by minute. When she reached the cut lock, counsel interrupted. Confirm lock was maintenance owned and cut without authorization? Gus answered. Confirmed. My lock, my key, my tag, cut with bolt cutters. Counsel took a breath audibly over the speaker. Then OSHA classification risk elevates from serious to willful if corroborated. Preserve all communications from Mr. Colby regarding guard removal and startup directives. Mariah spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. His handwritten note in logbook says, guard removed for cycle time efficiency. Photo timestamp 5:44 a.m. uploaded to safety folder. Good, counsel said. That line will matter. The insurer call came at 4:37 p.m., and everyone could hear the adjuster's careful language through the room speaker. Given preliminary indication of intentional safeguarding, bypass and lockout control interference, we are issuing reservation of rights. Coverage review will proceed, but claims directly attributable to willful violation may be excluded in part. Mark rubbed his forehead with both hands as the adjuster continued. You should anticipate premium adjustment at renewal and possible sublimit application pending final findings. Ron asked. Plain language? Mark answered before the adjuster could. It means they might pay some, deny some, and punish us next year regardless. The adjuster did not disagree. By 5:10 p.m., Priya's team had quarantined every in-process part from Bay 3 and 2 adjacent staging carts. She reported the count in the room. 342 components on hold pending contamination and traceability review. Any part exposed after divider breach is presumptive scrap unless we can validate containment. Mark added another figure to the screen. Material and labor exposure there, approximately 240,000. Ron asked Maria directly, can any of that be salvaged safely? Maria answered with the same hard certainty she had used all day. If chain of custody or surface integrity is in doubt on aerospace hardware, you scrap. We don't ship uncertainty. He nodded once. Then we scrap uncertainty. At 5:46 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the first insult in Bay 3, Dana received preliminary hospital detail and read it from her tablet in the conference room doorway. Eli sustained a non-life-threatening forearm injury and is expected to recover function. Trent remains post-op. Surgeons report significant shoulder damage with probable long-term nerve impairment in the left arm. She paused before the last line. No fatalities. The room exhaled as one body, but no one relaxed. Ron closed his laptop and looked around the table. This plant runs on procedure or it does not run. We are shut down in turning until external monitor clearance. 19-day plan starts now. Dana leads corrective action. Gus leads mechanical recertification. Priya handles customer transparency packet. Mark prepares penalty and cash flow mitigation. Lisa handles disciplinary chain and retaliation review. He turned to Maria last. You will assist EHS as technical witness on lathe safeguarding and startup sequence. Maria asked. Am I still coded insubordinate? Lisa answered before Ron could. Temporary code remains suspended pending formal correction. You are not under disciplinary restriction tonight. It was not an apology, but it was movement. She walked back through Bay 3 after the meeting while second shift stood down and cleanup crews worked around taped boundaries. The broken divider had been measured and tagged. The coolant tray had a collection basin under it. The detached guard now sat on a padded cart with a bright orange evidence label across the hinge. On the whiteboard, someone had crossed out Late Order Recovery Week and written in black marker beneath it, Lockout is not optional. At 6:22 p.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Janice in the crib. Heard Eli is home. Stable. Maria typed back one word, good, and put the phone away. She stood at the edge of the taped zone and looked at the spindle that had stayed silent since 2:13. She could still hear Trent's just bump it in the back of her head, but now it had numbers attached to it, and those numbers would outlive every argument. 19 days down, 2.7 million in penalties, 640,000 in medical and remediation reserve before final coding, insurer rights reserved and partially denied exposure, federal investigators notified for potential willful citation. 90 seconds of setup had purchased a full quarter of damage. Gus joined her with a clipboard and a tired expression. I logged every collected item, he said. Key, lock, cutters, guard bolts, parameter printouts, relay jumper, logbook copy. Nothing loose. Good, Maria said. No loose ends. He followed her gaze to the spindle. You called it at dawn. She shook her head once. The machine called it. I just translated. Behind them, floor lights shifted to evening mode and the bay took on that cooler industrial blue that made steel look almost clinical. No one cheered. No one argued. People moved with the subdued precision that followed preventable harm, each task now framed by the cost everyone had heard out loud. Physics had finished speaking. The paperwork had finally started listening. At 6:41 p.m., Ron called Maria back to the calibration room before she reached the locker aisle. The monitor now showed a split screen. Security footage on the left. Chain of custody ledger on the right. Dana stood beside the keyboard. Gus with crossed arms near the door. Lisa with a legal pad open to a fresh page. Ron did not sit. We close the day with facts, not impressions, he said. Maria, watch this and confirm sequence. Dana pressed play. The overhead camera angle was harsh and grainy, but the mechanics were unmistakable. At 11:38, Trent bent the cabinet, bolt cutters closing on Gus's lock. At 12:05, the guard was swung into place, photographed, then swung back out. At 2:13, Eli's wrist moved toward the key. Trent's hand intercepted it, and Eli's thumb hit start. The frame rate skipped. Then the divider fractured in a white burst. Dana froze the clip on the exact frame where the key left the chuck. "Trajectory marker aligns with your verbal," she said quietly. Maria nodded once. "Primary tangent at chest height. Same lane I described." Ron turned to Lisa. "Classification?" Lisa wrote one line in block capitals. "Willful bypass with supervisory coercion." No one argued. By 7:10 p.m., Dana had each evidence item physically verified on the table under bright metrology lights. The chuck key in sealed tube, the cut, lock, and shackle halves, the bolt cutters tagged by security, the relay jumper in anti-static bag, guard bolts in separate pouch, printouts of the ramp parameter and guard status transitions, and the original logbook page copy with Trent's cycle time note. Maria initialed each line as witness to collection integrity. Gus initialed mechanical custody. Dana scanned signatures into the insurer portal and the internal legal hold. Outside, second shift moved quietly around the taped bay. Inside, the paper trail finally matched the physics trail. At 7:36 p.m., dispatch patched a call from occupational medicine. Eli was home with sutures, pain control, and a no-machinery restriction for 6 weeks. Maria listened on speaker while Lisa documented. Eli's voice was thin but steady. "I need to amend my statement," he said. "Earlier I said pressure. I want the exact words on record," he said. "Just bump it." Then he touched my wrist when I reached for the key. Lisa answered, "Amendment recorded in 1936. Do you affirm voluntarily?" "I do." When the call ended, Maria felt an old tension loosened by a single notch. Eli had chosen clarity over self-protection. That mattered. The next morning, just after 8 a.m., OSHA arrived with a compliance officer named Arthur Keene and a field hygienist carrying calibrated cameras and a measuring wheel. The plant had already shut Bay 3 behind hard barriers. Arthur listened without theatrics, then asked for sequence, safeguards, and authority chain in that order. Maria walked him through the lathe's normal state and the altered state. Pointing to the empty hinge bracket, the replaced lock location, and the plexi impact line still marked with evidence tape, Arthur asked, "Why did the interlock not prevent start?" Gus answered, "Channel integrity was compromised and jumper was found in override run position." Arthur looked at Maria. "You observed that before incident?" "Yes." "Logged at 6:18 with dispatch and EHS witness?" Arthur made a note. "That timestamp will matter." He measured from spindle center to divider breach and read out the number. 38 inches. Strike lane exactly where operators stand during setup. Then he asked security to replay footage and watched it twice without speaking. On the third pass, he paused at the lock-cutting frame and turned to Ron. "This is no training lapse," he said. "This is management-directed safeguard defeat." By the second Tuesday after the shutdown, Aerodyne sent its third-party safety monitor, Ingrid Sato, a former military depot engineer with a voice like a torque wrench click. She did not ask for promises. She asked for proof. Maria met her in Bay 3 at 6:05 a.m. with Gus and Dana, all three in front of a fully reinstalled guard assembly and a fresh interlock test sheet. Ingrid pointed at the chuck. Show me startup validation under setup mode. Maria performed the sequence deliberately, narrating each control state. Guard closed. Interlock channels A and B confirmed. Key removed and placed in magnetic cradle with new tether clip installed. Ramp parameter restored to 2.5 seconds in setup profile. No bypass jumpers. Spindle start inhibited when guard opened. Each result was filmed and countersigned. Ingrid then asked for blind test. She opened the guard by 3 inches and said, "Try to start." Maria pressed start. Nothing happened except a denied start fault and amber beacon. Ingrid gave one short nod. That is what compliance sounds like. At 9:40 that same morning, HR convened Maria's retaliatory write-up review in Conference B Lisa chaired, with one union steward present and Ron attending by policy. Maria sat straight-backed, palms flat on the table. Lisa read the prior code aloud, then the amended evidence findings. Original entry stated refusal of production directive, Lisa said. Corrected finding states protected refusal under SOP 11.4 and AN SI aligned hazard condition. Attendance points are voided. Reassignment code removed. Back pay for differential loss is approved. Maria held her breath until the next line. Further, effective immediately, Maria Hayes is reinstated to lead operator status and assigned acting safety lead for manual turning until permanent posting. Ron looked directly at her. You were right on mechanism and right on process. This company should have said that sooner. She answered with the same tone she used at the machine. I needed the code corrected, not praise. You have both now, he said. At 1:15 p.m., Legal held Trent's disciplinary conference by video from the rehabilitation unit, his left arm in a supported sling, hospital band still on his wrist. Company counsel attended, along with Ron, Lisa, and an external investigator. Maria was not required there, but Lisa asked if she wanted to observe as reporting witness. She chose yes. Trent appeared pale and angry, speaking through clenched restraint. This plant was behind because people stalled. I made operational calls. Counsel answered operational calls do not include cutting maintenance locks or directing startup with disabled safeguards. Trent tried one last deflection. Everyone knew the guard was off. Ron replied, Exactly. That is why your accountability is direct. Lisa read the termination language slowly, each clause anchored to a document ID, gross misconduct, willful safety violation, retaliatory action, lockout tampering, and falsification by staged guard photo. Badge deactivated permanently. Management authority revoked. Mandatory referral to State Credential Board. Trent stared at the camera for a long second, then looked away. He had no procedural lane left. On the first Monday of November, Maria sat in the back row of county court beside Dana while Trent entered a plea to a workplace safety violation tied to supervisory conduct. The hearing was brief and unsentimental. The prosecutor cited the evidence chain, video, and witness consistency. Defense counsel argued stress and production pressure. The judge cut through it in one sentence. Schedule pressure explains motive, the judge said. It does not excuse disabling safeguards. Plea accepted. Probation terms, fines, mandatory safety leadership prohibition, and referral outcome confirming loss of management credential in regulated manufacturing roles. No drama, no raised voices, only a clean legal endpoint. 3 days later, Mark from Finance presented final numbers in the same calibration room where the footage had first played. Penalties landed at $2.7 million. Medical and remediation settled at $640,000. Insurer paid part, denied part under willful act reservation exactly as warned. Premium increase, locked for renewal year. The scrap quarantine count held. Priya confirmed all doubtful parts were destroyed with traceable certificates, not reworked into ambiguity. Aerodyne lifted the customer hold only after Ingrid signed the second verification and witnessed 2 uneventful shifts with full safeguarding compliance. That afternoon, Gus returned each closed evidence file to records. Item by item, he read disposition codes while Dana updated the ledger. Chuck key analyzed and archived as training artifact. Cut lock and cutters retained through legal closure, then released to disposal. Relay jumper retained with investigative packet. Guard bolts returned after recertification. Diagnostic printout scanned to immutable archive. Logbook copy preserved under legal hold and mirrored in insurer file. Nothing missing, nothing unaccounted. At 5:42 p.m., exactly 1 month after the opening insult, Bay 3 ran first article under Maria's supervision. The guard was down, tether clip visible, start cadence unhurried. Eli, cleared for light duty, stood outside the envelope with Ingrid observing and Janice logging tool issue at the crib terminal. Maria handed Eli the key. "Say it out loud," she said. He seated, tightened, removed, and held it up. Key out. Again. Key out. Only then did she press start. The spindle came up on the restored ramp, smooth and contained. No blur beyond the shield. No shortcuts, masquerading as skill. Everyone in the bay watched for 3 seconds that felt longer than the whole morning of the incident, then returned to work when nothing happened, which was the point. As shift lights dimmed into evening blue, Ron posted the permanent notice on the Bay 3 board. Safeguards are conditions of operation, not options. Under it, he added the policy revision requiring dual sign-off for any guard access and automatic production stop on interlock anomalies. He handed Maria the signed appointment letter for safety lead, manual turning group. She folded it once and tucked it into her clipboard. Around her, the shop sounded like a shop again. Controlled motors, measured voices, steel being cut with respect instead of bravado. The principle had not won because anyone gave in. It won because every system that mattered, medical, legal, financial, customer, and floor procedure, finally aligned with a truth Maria had stated before sunrise. Authority could issue orders, but rotational energy still answered only to physics.